Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are plunging into something really, really fundamental about being human. Fear. You sent us this fascinating, incredibly detailed paper. Fear as a primary human sensation, an AI critique.
Yeah, quite a title.
It really makes a powerful case that fear might just be, well, the most profound sensation we experience, and you were keen for us to unpack that.
I was. It digs really deep, and I wanted to see what we could pull out of it, looking at whether fear really deserves that top spot.
Exactly. So our mission today is to get right to the heart of that claim. We'll look at fear from all the angles the paper presents: biology, psychology, history, culture.
Even philosophy. It's impressively comprehensive, pulling from so many different fields. It's a rich source, definitely.
It really is. And that central question just hangs over everything.
Yeah.
Is fear truly the most profound, the most universally impactful sensation compared to others? Like love or hope.
That's the core of it. It's a big claim.
Okay, let's dive in. The paper kicks off by looking at where fear even fits in the whole landscape of human emotions.
Right. Gets into these theories of basic emotions. The idea is, are there core feelings that are just innate, universal?
And there's debate there, isn't there? Like, are they distinct categories or more like dimensions, pleasantness, arousal, that kind of thing?
Exactly. Discrete versus dimensional models.
Mm-hmm.
But what's really interesting is that fear, well, it almost always makes the cut on these lists of basic emotions.
Yeah, you see it everywhere. Ekman's famous 6: happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, surprise. Others too, like Izard, Plutchik.
Kanksepp, Oatley, and Johnson Laird. The list goes on. Fear is consistently there.
So what makes an emotion basic, according to these theories? Is it just that it feels strong?
It's usually more specific criteria. Things like universal facial expressions, that wide-eyed look of fear, distinct physiological responses.
Like fight or flight.
Precisely. Yeah. And clear evolutionary functions, survival value being the big one for fear. It ticks those boxes pretty clearly.
But the paper doesn't just leave it there. It points out the list isn't like set in stone.
No, definitely not. Some researchers argue for including others: love, hope, maybe even interest.
And then there's this really different take the sim theory.
Ah, yes, that was quite novel. It proposes that maybe the only truly fundamental emotions are hope and fear.
Just two? How does that work?
Well, the idea is they arise from how our minds interact with concepts. So interacting with a new or present concept generates hope, while an absent concept generates fear. It's a cognitive interaction view.
Huh. That positions hope and fear as this kind of fundamental duality, doesn't it?
Exactly, like these core poles of our experience, constantly interacting. It's a unique perspective on that hope-fear relationship we all feel.
The paper even includes a comparison table of these theories, which really drives home how much discussion there still is.
Highlights the different criteria people use and the resulting lists. It's not settled science.
So, okay, let's compare fear directly then. Fear versus love. Hope, desire. How does fear stack up for that most universal title?
Well, fear's case is strong. Its evolutionary role in survival is undeniable, right? That fight or flight mechanism.
And the neurobiology seems pretty consistent too.
Very conserved, yeah. The amygdala's role, those pathways are found across many species. Plus, we recognize fearful expressions cross-culturally, and it appears really early in babies. That all points to something fundamental.
But what about love? It's profound. It feels fundamental.
Absolutely. And has evolutionary roots too, in attachment, bonding. Its impact on well-being, social connection, even physical health is enormous.
And the paper notes that love, or maybe feelings of safety, can actually regulate fear.
That's a key point. They aren't totally separate, but is the basic expression of love as universal as the basic expression of fear. That's where it gets trickier.
How so?
The complex ways we understand and express love seem much more varied across cultures than, say, the immediate physical reaction to a sudden threat. Fear's basic physiological signature seems more consistent globally.
Okay, that makes sense. What about hope?
Hope's fascinating. It's about anticipating positive outcomes. It fuels motivation, resilience. Philosophers like Seneca and Spinoza noted ages ago how tied hope and fear are. You can't really have one without the other when facing uncertainty.
Like two sides of the same coin, and that sim theory links them fundamentally.
Right. And like love, what we hope for is heavily shaped by culture. But the underlying capacity for hope, that forward-looking drive that counteracts fear's paralysis, that feels pretty universal too.
And desire, the drive for things we want.
Desire is definitely a fundamental drive. Basic biological ones: food, water, safety, sex. But then you get all the complex desires shaped by society.
And desire usually leads to approach behavior, right? Whereas fear is about avoidance.
Exactly. Opposite motivational directions. But the sheer variety of things people desire makes it harder to pin down as a single, universally expressed sensation in the same way as the core fear response.
So synthesizing this, fear's claim to being the most universal seems strongest because of that direct link to immediate survival and its highly conserved biological mechanisms.
I think that's a fair summary of the argument. While love, hope, and desire are incredibly profound and essential, their more complex expressions show more cultural variability than fear's basic reaction.
But even fear isn't purely biological, right? The paper stresses the interplay with culture.
Crucially, yes. What triggers our fear, how we learn to fear specific things, even how we express it, that's all shaped by learning and cultural context. But the argument is that the underlying mechanism is more biologically fixed than perhaps for love or hope in their richer forms.
Which brings us back to that hope-fear duality from sim theory. If that's right, it reinforces fear's importance but ties it inextricably to hope.
A fundamental motivational tension. Moving away from threat or absence, moving towards the desired or novel. Focusing just on fear might miss the vital role hope plays in managing it.
Okay, so we've placed fear among the basic emotions. Let's really get into the biology now, the nuts and bolts.
Right. The biological architecture. How does it actually work?
The paper starts with evolution, as you'd expect, fear as this ancient survival tool.
Absolutely. It's an adaptive response. Organisms that detected and responded effectively to threats were more likely to survive, reproduce, pass on those genes. It's that simple, really.
And you mentioned the neural pathways are highly conserved.
Yeah, especially in mammals. You see similar structures and circuits doing similar jobs, which points to very old evolutionary origins.
And we have both innate fears and learned fears.
We do. Some things seem to trigger fear almost automatically, loud noises, predator smells for some animals.
Yeah.
But we also learn to fear things through experience, like Pavlov's dogs. That's classical conditioning.
So it's flexible.
Very. That dual capacity, innate triggers plus learning, gives us flexibility to respond to both ancient dangers and new threats in our specific environment.
Okay, the brain structures. The amygdala comes up again and again.
It's the star player, really. Think of it as the brain's emotional salience detector, especially for threats. It evaluates danger and helps orchestrate the fear response.
Involved in both kinds of fear, innate and learned.
Yes. And it's heavily connected to other key areas. The hypothalamus, which controls hormone release, the brainstem for basic physical reactions, the hippocampus for memory, and the prefrontal cortex for regulation.
And we see it light up in brain scans when people are scared.
Definitely. And it tends to be hyperreactive in anxiety disorders, suggesting it's central to problems with fear regulation.
Then there's the HPA axis. That sounds clinical.
It's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Basically, it's the main hormonal stress response system.
How does it work in fear?
Well, the amygdala can trigger the hypothalamus to release a hormone, CRF, that tells the pituitary gland to release ACTH, which then tells the adrenal gland sitting on top of your kidneys to release cortisol.
Cortisol, the stress hormone.
That's the one. Cortisol helps mobilize energy for that fight or flight response. But the system is regulated. The hippocampus can help put the brakes on.
But if you're chronically scared,
then that HPA axis can become chronically activated, leading to high cortisol levels, which has knock-on effects for health. We'll probably touch on that later.
So it's not just the amygdala and HPA. There are other immediate responses, too.
The sympathetic nervous system activation, that's your immediate adrenaline rush.
Adrenaline and noradrenaline.
Exactly. They cause the rapid heart rate, increased blood pressure, faster breathing, getting you ready to act now. And that CRF hormone from the HPA axis, it also acts directly in the brain as a neurotransmitter, promoting fear and anxiety itself.
Wow. Any other hormones?
Others, like vasopressin and oxytocin, can modulate the HPA axis and influence social aspects of fear. But adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol are the big players in the immediate response.
And other brain regions. You mentioned the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex.
Right. The hippocampus is crucial for forming contextual fear memories, remembering where and when something scary happened. It also helps regulate that HPA axis.
And the prefrontal cortex, that's the more thinking part.
Generally, yes. Particularly parts like the ventromedial and dorsolateral PFC. They're involved in cognitive appraisal, figuring out if something is really a threat, regulating fear, extinguishing learned fears, and making decisions under risk.
So judging the situation.
Essentially. There are also lower brain regions, like the periaqueductal gray in the midbrain, involved in executing those hardwired defensive behaviors, freezing, fighting, fleeing, and even pathways for rapid visual threat detection, like the superior colliculus and pulvinar feeding info quickly to the amygdala, maybe even before conscious awareness.
The paper includes a table summarizing all this. It's a lot of interconnected parts.
It's a sophisticated network, and neurotransmitters are the messengers making it all work.
Like what?
Well, there's a crucial balance between GABA, which is inhibitory, it calms things down, and glutamate, which is excitatory. An imbalance in fear circuits, maybe too much glutamate or not enough GABA, is implicated in anxiety disorders.
Yeah, like the brain's brake and accelerator pedals.
Kind of, yeah. And then you have others like serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and CRF acting as modulators, fine-tuning the system.
And genetics. Does that play a role in how scared we get?
It does. Studies suggest heritability for fear responses is somewhere around 35–45%. Specific genes, especially those related to the HPA axis like CRHR1 or NR3C1, have been linked to differences in brain activation during fear learning.
So it's not just experiences, it's also our genetic makeup.
It's that classic gene-environment interaction. Our genes might give us certain predispositions, but our experiences shape how those play out, influencing our individual fear sensitivity.
Okay, pulling this biological section together, it's a multi-layered system. Fast, almost automatic pathways for immediate danger.
And slower, more deliberative cortical pathways for evaluation and control. That balance is likely what's been so evolutionarily successful.
And those fast pathways really support the idea of fear being primal.
They do. What's also fascinating, and the paper touches on this, is the overlap between these fear circuits and the circuits involved in economic decision-making, especially around risk and potential loss.
So our fear biology influences our financial choices.
It provides a biological basis for why fear and anxiety can significantly sway our choices, sometimes away from strict rationality, and the genetic component adds that layer of individual difference. We all have the machinery, but it might be tuned slightly differently.
Okay, so we've got the biology. Let's zoom out now. How does fear play out in the bigger picture across history and cultures?
Right. Fear isn't just an individual feeling. It's a powerful social force.
The paper argues it's been a major catalyst in history.
Absolutely. Think about it. Fear of oppression driving revolutions, fear of scarcity causing mass migrations, fear of the other fueling conflicts. But sometimes shared fear can also create unity against a common enemy.
The French Revolution comes up as an example.
Yes, it's a potent case study. There's fear of the monarchy, fear of anarchy, fear of counter-revolution, fear of starvation. Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by fear.
Did it drive the revolution?
Historians argue it was a significant force. It impacted decision-making, sometimes negatively, contributing to violence like the Reign of Terror. But it also shaped revolutionary identity and motivated actions like storming the Bastille. Fear was woven into the fabric of it.
And then there's the idea of historical trauma.
This shows how the intense fear experienced during large-scale traumas like colonization, slavery, genocide doesn't just disappear. It can leave lasting psychological scars across generations, contributing to ongoing health and social disparities. Fear becomes part of a collective memory and experience.
Wow. Okay, shifting to culture more broadly, fear seems embedded in our stories and rituals.
Deeply, myths often explain frightening natural phenomena. Rituals impose order on uncertainty. Belief systems grapple with existential fears. Think about cautionary tales reinforcing social norms, fear of punishment, divine or social.
And the fear of death seems particularly central.
The paper argues it's a major organizing principle for many cultural systems. Religions, philosophies, elaborate funeral rituals, ancestor veneration. You can see many of these as attempts to manage the terror of mortality, provide meaning, and maintain social cohesion in the face of death.
Rituals in general help manage fear.
They often do by providing structure, a sense of control, or a shared way of confronting the unknown or the frightening.
Then the paper introduces this sociological concept, the culture of fear.
Yeah, this idea, associated with thinkers like Frank Furedi or Barry Glassner, suggests that sometimes fear becomes the dominant organizing principle in a society, often intentionally cultivated.
How so? Intentionally.
Well, fear can be a powerful tool for social and political control. Think about drumming up fear of external enemies or internal threats as immigrants, specific social groups, crime, disease, economic collapse.
To manipulate public opinion.
Exactly. To justify policies, increase surveillance, consolidate power. The paper mentions the war on terror as a potential example, or how fear was used systematically during Brazil's military dictatorship through repression and censorship.
And the media's role.
The media can both reflect and amplify societal fears. Sometimes this contributes to moral panics, where public anxiety about an issue is way out of proportion to the actual threat.
Are we living in a culture of fear now?
Some sociologists argue contemporary Western societies might be prone to it, with a heightened sense of vulnerability and anxiety, but everyday risks what some call a precautionary culture, perhaps shaped more by media narratives than objective evidence. There are also societal feeling rules about how we're supposed to react emotionally to fearful situations.
Anthropology offers another lens, looking across cultures.
Right. It acknowledges the biological basics, but emphasizes how much culture shapes the experience and meaning of fear.
So what we fear varies.
Tremendously. Some fears might be near universal, like sudden loud noises, but many others are specific to cultural beliefs, environments, or social structures. Think supernatural fears or fears related to specific taboos.
And how we express or even label fear.
That varies too. Language itself carves up emotional experience differently. Some cultures might link fear more closely with shame, for instance, and cultural beliefs, like strong religious faith or fatalism, might transform or seem to mask how fear is experienced or expressed.
Fear can mediate relationships between groups too.
Definitely. Especially where there are power imbalances, like in colonial situations. Fear can be used by dominant groups to control subordinate ones. It can maintain group boundaries and enforce norms, sometimes working alongside or instead of shame. Anthropology really stresses looking at fear in its specific cultural context, using local understandings.
So, synthesizing the historical and cultural aspects, fear is clearly a potent social and political force.
Hugely. And it's manipulable on a societal scale. That culture of fear idea shows how it can become deeply embedded, shaping public discourse and control mechanisms.
But anthropology balances that by showing how much the meaning and function of fear vary.
Exactly. Biology provides the canvas, but culture paints the picture. And that fear of death really emerges as a potentially fundamental motivator behind complex cultural systems designed to give life meaning and order.
Okay, let's bring it back down to the individual level now. How does fear affect our thinking and behavior?
Right, the cognitive and behavioral correlates. Fear doesn't just feel bad, it changes how our minds work.
Especially with decision-making and risk.
Yes, that's a major area. Fear tends to skew our perception of risk. We often overestimate the likelihood of negative outcomes and underestimate positive ones.
Leading to risk aversion.
Often, yes. We might avoid choices with uncertain outcomes, even if they have potentially high rewards, especially when things feel ambiguous. We stick to the safe option.
And neuroeconomics links this back to the brain circuits we talked about.
It does. That overlap between fear circuits like the amygdala and PSC and circuits involved in evaluating value and probability helps explain why fear can pull our decisions away from pure rationality. Anxiety itself can directly impact economic behavior.
The paper lists specific cognitive biases linked to fear.
Quite a few. There's negativity bias, giving more weight to bad news or negative information.
I think we all do that sometimes.
It seems quite common. Then there's loss aversion. The pain of losing something feels much stronger than the pleasure of gaining the same thing.
Which affects financial decisions.
Big time. And career choices, potentially. Also, the availability heuristic, judging how likely something is based on how easily examples come to mind. Scary, vivid examples are often easily recalled.
Like plane crashes versus car crashes.
Classic example. Then there's threat attention bias. Our attention gets automatically drawn to potentially threatening things in our environment. And negative interpretation bias, seeing ambiguous situations or stimuli as threatening.
So our thinking gets systematically skewed towards threat detection and avoidance.
Pretty much. A meta-analysis mentioned in the paper suggests fear generally decreases risk-taking, though the effect size is small to moderate and there's variability.
It's not always straightforward.
No. The effect seems stronger in clinical anxiety or when the stakes are tangible, like money. So context and individual differences matter a lot. It's complex.
What about fear in social situations, its role in social dynamics?
It's paradoxical, really. On one hand, like we saw historically, a shared fear of an external threat can really boost group cohesion and cooperation, circling the wagons.
But on the other hand,
fear is so often implicated in prejudice, discrimination, and conflict between groups. Fear of the unknown, fear of those who seem different, fear stoked by political rhetoric, scapegoating. It's a common pattern.
That culture of fear idea, again, using fear of certain groups.
Exactly. It can be used to maintain social hierarchies. And fear can spread rapidly through social networks, emotional contagion. Think of panic spreading in a crowd. This can even be modeled computationally.
And the health consequences.
Yeah.
We touched on the HPA axis.
Right. There's the subjective distress, just feeling anxious, worried, panicky, which obviously impacts quality of life.
And clinical disorders.
Yes, excessive or inappropriate fear is the hallmark of anxiety disorders. Specific phobias, social anxiety, panic disorder, GAD, PTSD. These involve dysregulation in those fear circuits we discussed.
And the physical toll.
Chronic activation of the stress response, the HPA axis and sympathetic nervous system, takes a toll.
Right.
Prolonged high levels of cortisol and adrenaline are linked to cardiovascular problems, immune system suppression, metabolic issues, digestive problems, maybe even accelerated aging. It wears the body down.
So synthesizing this section, fear systematically biases our cognition towards threat avoidance. Biases like loss aversion explain seemingly irrational choices.
But its effect on risk isn't uniform. And socially, it's a double-edged sword, fostering cohesion within groups, but conflict between them.
And chronic fear carries significant mental and physical health costs. Okay, let's turn to philosophy and ethics. How do thinkers grapple with fear on a deeper level?
This is where we get into the existential weight of fear.
Existentialism seems key here.
Very much so. Existentialists focus on individual freedom, responsibility, and the lack of inherent meaning in the universe. They often distinguish fear, having a specific object, from anxiety or angst.
Angst being
more of an objectless dread, a fundamental anxiety arising from our awareness of freedom, possibility, the contingency of existence, even nothingness itself.
Kierkegaard's dizziness of freedom.
Exactly, that feeling of being overwhelmed by choices and responsibility. And Heidegger saw angst as revealing our being towards death, the fundamental groundlessness of our existence.
Is confronting this anxiety seen as good?
It's seen as crucial for living authentically. Authenticity means facing up to our freedom and mortality, taking responsibility, creating meaning rather than hiding in conformity or denial, what Sartre called bad faith.
Camus and the absurd fit in here too.
Yes. Camus focused on the absurd gap between our human longing for meaning and a silent, indifferent universe. He advocated embracing the absurd, revolting against it by living intensely like Sisyphus, finding meaning in his struggle, rather than succumbing to the fear of meaninglessness or death.
Are there other existentialist fear themes?
Sartre's concept of the look, the anxiety of being perceived and judged by others, turned into an object in their view. And Simone de Beauvoir wrote about the ethics of ambiguity, the anxiety inherent in freedom and our ethical responsibility towards others.
So existentialism reframes fear and anxiety not just as problems, but as fundamental aspects of the human condition tied to freedom and meaning-making.
Precisely. It gives it a different kind of weight.
Now, what about the ethical implications of fear?
This is critical because fear is so powerful it's easily exploited. Deliberately inducing fear for control, whether in politics, relationships, or marketing, is ethically problematic because it disrespects autonomy. It uses a primal vulnerability to manipulate people's choices and behavior. The whole idea of a culture of fear raises serious ethical questions about societal manipulation.
What about communicating threats, like in journalism or public health?
There's a huge ethical responsibility there. How do you convey necessary warnings without causing undue panic or harm? Sensationalism can be really damaging.
So communicators need to be careful.
Extremely. Accurate information, context, a measured tone, distinguishing possibility from certainty, offering guidance, not just inciting fear. These are crucial ethical considerations for journalists, officials, leaders, even scientists. Think about a poorly reported weather forecast causing panic buying.
And the balance between safety and freedom.
That's a constant ethical tension. Security measures often involve restricting liberties, surveillance, checkpoints, lockdowns. There needs to be a careful weighing of the actual threat level against the cost to freedom and rights. It's rarely an easy calculation.
And tying back to existentialism.
If freedom and authentic choice are paramount, then manipulating fear is unethical because it undermines that very capacity for free, conscious decision-making. Recognizing our shared vulnerability, our shared condition of facing fear and anxiety, could foster an ethics of solidarity and respect.
Okay, so philosophically, fear is tied to our core existence. Ethically, its power makes it dangerous and demands responsibility in how we wield or communicate it. Let's move to solutions. How can we manage or mitigate fear?
Fortunately, psychology offers effective, evidence-based approaches.
Like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes. CBT is a cornerstone. It targets the interplay between thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Key techniques include cognitive restructuring,
Which is?
identifying and challenging those negative, distorted thoughts that fuel fear, like catastrophizing or overestimating danger. Comparing theory A, the scary thought, with a more realistic theory B.
And exposure therapy.
That involves gradually and safely confronting the feared situations or stimuli. The goal is habituation, getting used to it, and disconfirming the fearful beliefs. C, the bad thing didn't happen.
And CBT works well.
Very strong empirical support for anxiety disorders, phobias, panic, PTSD, GAD, OCD. Even brief versions can be effective.
What about mindfulness?
Mindfulness-based interventions, MBIs, are also very helpful. They cultivate non-judgmental awareness of the present moment, thoughts, feelings, bodily sensations.
How does that help with fear?
Through practices like meditation, you learn to observe fear arise without automatically reacting to it or getting swept away. It helps reduce rumination, decreases emotional reactivity, improves focus, and builds metacognitive awareness. They change your relationship to the fearful thoughts. Some studies suggest it can be as effective as CBT for certain anxiety symptoms.
And ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy.
ACT takes a slightly different angle. It emphasizes accepting difficult internal experiences, like fear, rather than fighting them, and instead committing to actions aligned with your personal values, even while feeling afraid.
So it's not about eliminating fear, but acting despite it.
Exactly. Living a valued life even with the presence of fear.
Beyond therapy, what about education and critical thinking?
Hugely important. Simply understanding the neurobiology and psychology of fear, knowing why you feel this way, can be demystifying and empowering. Recognizing cognitive biases helps you spot them in your own thinking.
And media literacy.
Essential. Being able to critically evaluate information sources, identify fear-mongering tactics or logical fallacies, distinguish evidence from opinion. These skills equip you to navigate the information landscape more discerningly and resist manipulation.
And responsible communication practices again.
Yes, for those disseminating information, especially during crises, accuracy, clarity, context, measured tone, offering actionable guidance, it's crucial for preventing panic and fostering constructive responses rather than just fear.
The paper also stresses resilient social support and trust.
Absolutely. Strong social networks act as a buffer against stress and fear. Knowing you have reliable people for emotional or practical support enhances your capacity to cope. Connection combats the isolation that fear can bring.
And trust?
Trust in institutions, experts, and information sources is vital, especially under conditions of uncertainty. If trust is high, people are more likely to heed advice and less likely to panic. When trust erodes, fear can easily escalate. Safe environments, physical, social, emotional, also reduce baseline anxiety.
So it's a multi-level approach, individual skills like CBT and mindfulness.
Interpersonal factors like social support, and societal elements like responsible communication, media literacy, building trust, ensuring safety. It highlights the plasticity of fear responses we can learn to manage them better.
Okay, let's look at how different fields conceptualize fear. It seems everyone has a model.
They do, which reflects how complex fear is. Psychology have basic emotion theories, dimensional models, cognitive appraisal theories, learning theories, neurobiological models, lots of angles.
Socia.
Focuses on fear as social control, the culture of fear idea, how fear influences social cohesion or conflict, risk perception in society.
And behavioral economics.
Looks at how fear or related states like anxiety and loss aversion impacts economic decisions, often leading to deviations from rational actor models. Prospect theory, where losses loom larger than gains, is key here. Those cognitive biases we discussed are central.
Then there are computational approaches. Agent-based modeling. Sounds futuristic.
It's a powerful tool. You create computer simulations with lots of individual agents, virtual people, or entities that follow simple rules. They interact with each other and their environment.
What's the point?
To see how complex patterns emerge at the macro level from these simple micro-level interactions. It bridges the gap between individual behavior and societal outcomes.
So you can model fear spreading.
Exactly. You can simulate fear contagion through a network. How does panic spread based on who talks to whom, media influence, individual agent traits? You can explore factors affecting the speed and extent of propagation.
And model fear's impact on behavior.
Yeah, you incorporate fear into the agent's decision rules. How does fear affect their investment choices, whether they evacuate in an emergency or adopt health precautions? Then you see the collective consequences.
Can it model social patterns?
How fear might influence segregation between groups, compliance with social norms, or the emergence of cooperation versus conflict.
And AI comes into this.
AI techniques, like machine learning or reinforcement learning, can be used to create more sophisticated agent behaviors. AI can also analyze large data sets, social media feeds, news articles, physiological data to detect fear expression, track sentiment shifts, or identify fear-inducing content in the real world. Some models even try to evolve agent rules that generate observed social patterns related to fear.
So computational modeling helps formalize theories about fear.
Precisely. It lets you translate psychological or sociological ideas about how fear works into explicit rules for agents, and then run simulations to see if those rules generate outcomes that match reality. It's an in silico platform to test theories about fear's collective dynamics.
Putting it all together, the different disciplines show fear is incredibly multifaceted.
Absolutely. Biological, emotional, cognitive, social, political, existential. You need insights from all levels for a comprehensive understanding. No single discipline has the whole picture.
And computational modeling seems like a promising way to integrate some of these levels, especially looking at collective dynamics.
It offers a way to move beyond qualitative descriptions and quantitatively study things like social contagion of fear.
Okay, let's wrap this up. Coming back to that central question. Is fear the most profound human sensation? What's the verdict after this deep dive?
Well, it's undeniably profound. Its roots in biology for survival are clear. The neural circuits are ancient and powerful. It shapes our thinking through biases, drives avoidance behavior. It's been a massive force historically and culturally, used for control, shaping norms. And philosophically, it touches on core existential anxieties.
The most profound.
That single most part is where it gets tricky. You compare it to love, essential for attachment, well-being, a buffer against fear, or hope, the engine of motivation, resilience, the necessary counterpoint to fear's paralysis. Which one feels most profound is probably subjective, depends on the moment, the person.
Fear ensures survival, maybe, but love and hope give reasons for surviving.
That's a nice way to put it. Fear's basic biological universality seems strong, but its lived experience, its meaning, its impact on society, that's so heavily modulated by culture and context that claiming universal impact gets complicated.
And fear isn't monolithic. Acute panic is different from chronic anxiety or existential dread.
Exactly, and it constantly interacts with other emotions. Its relationship with hope, in particular, seems fundamental two sides of dealing with uncertainty, and its relationship with love and attachment, which provide the safety that regulates fear. While fear is mainly about avoidance, we're also powerfully driven by approach motivations.
So the final takeaway.
Fear is, without doubt, a fundamental pillar of the human condition. It reflects our vulnerability, our constant negotiation between danger and safety. Its power and reach are vast.
Understanding its complexity is key.
Understanding its biological necessity, its cognitive distortions, its social malleability, the ethical dangers it poses, and importantly, its intricate dance with hope and love that seems essential for navigating existence. And clearly, we need continued cross-disciplinary work to fully grasp it.
So a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. How does understanding the biological roots of fear perhaps change how you think about your own anxieties? And looking forward, in what ways might actively cultivating hope be a practical strategy for navigating the uncertainties that life inevitably throws our way?
This is DigitView.